From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We are joined with our guest producer, Max the Mercenary Williams. Most importantly, you are here, and that makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Important shout out, because we like to be people of our word here on Stuff They Don't Want You to Know. Doug from Instagram. Doug from Instagram told me about the drugged up fish. Thanks so much, Doug. We want to make sure you get your due. Today's episode is not about drugged up fish. It's about war. You've heard of it before. You might like its earlier work. History books generally like to simplify conflicts. People like their stories to delineate a clear good or bad side, to find a moral high ground. And it makes for a compelling narrative in the classroom. It'll help you get an A on the test. But war is as much a function of business as it is of ideology. And since the dawn of conflict as an industry, some folks have been willing to wage war on behalf of anyone with the coin to pay for blood. The general term changes over time. Right now, you hear a lot of these groups called private military contractors. Back in the day, they were called mercenaries. And today's question is one that we've mulled over for some time. Is it true that Russia has a shadow army? Here are the facts. We have to start with this. What is the Wagner Group?
Ooh, sounds shadowy, that's for sure. Officially, the Wagner Group isn't a thing. It's been described as a paramilitary organization, a private military company, a collection of mercenaries. Vladimir Putin is often mentioned in the same breath as the Wagner Group, specifically attributing them to being his personal army. That's kind of spooky.
Yeah. There's all kinds of information you can find about this group online. A lot of it is not that trustworthy. Not sure where that information came from. You will see rumors abounding about this place. There is one story that I've seen in several places that claim the origins of this group find themselves with a single person named Dmitry Utkin, or that's how I say it. I think it's, what is his middle name? V. I just say Dmitry V. Utkin.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. This guy was a veteran who, like a lot of veterans here in the United States, saw opportunity, monetary opportunity, after leaving service. Except Dmitry, in this case, was, I think he was in the Chechen Wars. Is that correct?
Yeah, in the first and second Chechen Wars. Utkin is an old school vet. He served as a lieutenant colonel in special forces, basically in Russia's intelligence directorate, which is abbreviated to GRU. So he's kind of spooky in the tradecraft sense. As the story goes, and it is a story that has some holes in it, Utkin went private after his time in the service. We've got a lot of veterans in the audience today from the U.S. military branches as well as other countries' militaries. And if you've ever served, you know that it's not uncommon for people to finish their time with a government military and then to go into the private sector, leveraging their skills. Whether you are a whiz at satellite communications, or whether you say, hey, I've got military experience and I will drive a truck in a dangerous part of the world as part of a supply chain.
Or even like cybersecurity. It's just, It's common across the board.
Yeah, very much so. And not inherently sinister. This guy, as soon as he gets out, he joins an outfit called the Morin Security Group in 2013. This group is made up of Russian veterans, former military, and from what we could see, one of their primary stated goals is to focus on fighting piracy. Not copyright piracy. Don't worry, Morin's not going to bust down your door for trying to download the newest Thor movie or something. We mean like actual let's rob the boat. I am the captain now, pirates.
And then out of this group, or at least the leadership of this group, there's another another group that was created called the Slavonic Corps, CORPS. And that was based out of Hong Kong. It was specifically to protect oil interests in Syria. We're going to get into it, but where this group and the like subgroups, the ones that formed into it and formed out of it, they operate across the planet, as Ben stated there in the beginning. Very similarly to the Constellus, I don't know how to say it correctly. The huge umbrella group that now owns Academy, that used to be XE, used to be Blackwater.
They're for hire, right? I mean, it's not that they're just protecting Russian, interests, correct?
Well, that's sticky.
In this case, though, I'm sorry, I kind of muddled the thinking there. But in this case, there is a specific group called the Slavonic Corps that was based in Hong Kong, and it was specifically to protect oil interests in Syria.
Yeah, and they got a little bit out of their remit. It's important to note that Russia currently, as we record, has some pretty explicit laws about mercenaries. It's illegal. And interestingly enough, the government of Russia arrested some members of the Slavonic Corps after some disastrous events in Syria. Most people haven't heard of Wagner until quite recently in the United States. If you look at your news feeds of choice, whatever they are, odds are you will find some reports from 2022 due to their current activity in Ukraine. But they really come to prominence during the Donbass War in 2014, 2015. This results in the annexation of Crimea. Utkin was active in this since its inception. Where does the name Wagner come from? Well, opinions differ. Shout out Foreign Policy Magazine, who said the origins were unknown, and shout out to multiple other news sources who say the name derives from Utkin's call sign, his nom de guerre, his war name. And that's a story we'll get to in a second, but his street name in times of war was Wagner. Interestingly enough, to your point about things being murky, Matt, Utkin may not be the actual final level boss. That honor may go to a guy named Yevgeny Prigozhin, the guy who, kid you not, is sometimes referred to as Putin's chef.
Yeah, and he's referred to as that because he owns and operates, well, he at least owns, let's say, a ton of food service industry companies. And he specifically did stuff for the Kremlin and made food happen at big gatherings for the state. It's really, the dude has a fascinating story.
But also, he likes to chef up some carnage.
Yeah.
Well, but he's not just in food either. He's in all kinds of pursuits, specifically mining. He's a big miner.
Yeah. He is in mining. He is also, he's a very close confidant of Putin. He's in Putin's inner circle. And that's how these sorts of dictators work. He, in addition to being apparently a just top-notch chef or caterer, he controls a network of companies, including Wagner. And we'll see why this is important, why we're telling you that the story is somewhat unclear at times. What does Wagner do? Well, here's the thing. Whomever really runs the show, you can find them in multiple geopolitical conflicts where Russia has skin in the game or has some sort of goal. We're talking Syria, Libya, the Central African Republic, on and on. There are more than that. In each conflict, despite not officially existing, as Noel said, and despite being thought of as a mercenary group, as the United Nations has defined mercenaries, despite all that, they appear to be fighting to further Russian goals in every single conflict. So it's not a highest bidder situation.
Oh no. And it's often that they, at least officially, are active in those areas to provide, quote, security security for operations. And some of the things that we saw where they're cited are those specific mining operations where they're basically bodyguards for people who are working the mines and staff, as well as protecting the actual physical facilities, like the guards stationed outside or at the gates.
Right. And, again, as we go through this, we want all our fellow conspiracy realists to understand that a lot of criticism leveled at this practice, it could be a glass house, don't throw stones situation, sadly. You'll see what we mean momentarily. But in addition to those countries I just named, Wagner operatives have also been in Sudan, in Mali, in Mozambique, and they're exercising Russian influence via proxy, similar in some ways to the CIA method of propping up freedom fighters, right? That'll upon, if they do a successful coup, then they'll install a more pro-US regime. That's kind of what Wagner is doing, but they're all about the resources, to your point, Matt, seizing oil, gas fields, securing other things for resource extraction. They've been acting more and more like Western military contractors. They're evolving as we record.
Well, yeah, they also have a whole division that focuses on cyber attacks, cyber warfare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But so the big question is, look, go back. If you're already pausing and saying, why aren't they talking about Blackwater and all that stuff? Go back, listen to our episodes on private armies. We covered that pretty extensively. It's worth your time. And that is like the glass house thing. Like, we are aware of that. We were talking specifically about this Wagner Group, which is Wagner, by the way, if you haven't read the title of this yet. Just go back and listen to those. Let's stick with this one, though, because the big question that we posed in those episodes as well is, are these actually mercenaries when they're acting like this kind of private army, or are they really just some kind of secret arm of the military that they're fighting for or with, or maybe perhaps on their behalf? Mercenary or army?
And why does it matter? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there are these things called the Geneva Conventions. They're not as cool as other conventions you may have attended in the past for anime or, Dragon Con or something.
Yeah. No cosplay at the Geneva Conventions.
Very little cosplay. And the Geneva Conventions are a series of international agreements about how war should be conducted, how combatants should be treated, and what makes one a combatant. In 1977, an amendment to the original Geneva Conventions came out and said, okay, we're going to define mercenary because you guys are getting kind of wild with it. So they listed off 6 things. We can kind of round robin these, but for them, for the Geneva Conventions, a mercenary has to meet all 6 of these qualities. Number 1, they have to be especially recruited locally or abroad in order to fight in some armed conflict.
Also, they do, in fact, need to take part directly in these hostilities.
3, is motivated to take part in the hostilities essentially by the desire for private gain, getting paid, what's up, and in fact is promised by or on behalf of one of the parties in the conflicts to get some kind of material compensation that is in excess of what's promised or paid to combatants, like regular combatants, let's say in a military. So basically you're better paid than the military. That's what number 3 is.
Right. And additionally, number 4, you are neither a national of a party involved in the conflict, nor are you a resident of territory controlled by a party to conflict. So you are like, if there's, so like just to tease that out, mercenaries in Ethiopia, in a conflict in Ethiopia, they may be proxies of maybe a private corporation or proxies of, we're not saying anything bad here. This is entirely hypothetical. Or like they might be proxies of the Italian government, right? But they themselves are not Italian. They're not Ethiopian. They're not from that part of the world. They're there because they're paid to get stuff done.
Also, they are not members of the armed forces of a party to the conflict.
Yeah, so they're just not active military for one of the sides fighting, essentially. And number 6, finally, has not been sent by a state which is not a party to the conflict on official duty as a member of its armed forces. Wow, Ben, you want to wrap that into your example
Sure.
there?
It's like, if you have a really important package that you're mailing, you put all the foam you can in it, you tape it up as tight as you can. That's what they're doing. They're trying to legally tape up the definition of mercenary and get it all buttoned down, because if an individual meets all of these criteria, they're not considered a legal combatant. They're not considered a prisoner of war if captured. This is where it becomes really important. So if they are not those combatants, they're subject to regular criminal trials. And if they're found to be a mercenary, then they don't get some of the same considerations that a member of the military would get. They're treated as a common criminal. And you can find examples of this fairly recently. That's where they say, well, again, the definition of a state is the state has monopoly on violence. You're just somebody who got paid to kill people and burn things, right? That's the hyperbolic example. So you might get executed because you killed someone, which is a crime. And they also, because they don't count as POWs, they can't necessarily expect repatriation at the conclusion of a conflict, meaning they won't you won't be shipped back to your country of origin. But so that's mercenary, that's sticky. And you would think, okay, well, based on this definition, I take it the international community is generally speaking against this stuff. But here's the thing, multiple observers, when they think of mercenaries, they don't think the Wagner Group is really a bunch of mercenaries. Instead, it's supposed to be a hidden hand of Vladimir Putin doing all the dirty things, all the wet work that the official military won't touch. And that work gets very, very filthy very, very quickly. What are we talking about? We'll tell you after a word from our sponsors. Here's where it gets crazy.
Oh, man. Just from that list, guys, of what makes a mercenary, at least according to the Geneva Convention's amendment, it doesn't sound to me like Wagner Group would be mercenaries. It also doesn't sound like even, the U.S. versions of these private armies that we've spoken about, they wouldn't fit either, because they're nationals, right, of a country that's attempting to exert force, unless they're being paid by a third party to go to a fourth country.
Mm-hmm.
This is weird.
Yeah, but isn't this just kind of like a classic loophole kind of exploitation a little bit? I mean, I don't know. Not that anyone necessarily is particularly concerned in these situations about, adhering to the letter of the Geneva Convention per se. But I don't know. I've always wondered how things like Blackwater could be considered legal. I mean, it seems that they're what are they if not mercenaries?
It's private
they're
security,
soldiers
dude.
for hire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's just like a buzz term. That's it's calling something else by another word.
It's just war crime with more steps, right? So it's a good point. These are good points you guys are bringing up, because the group itself is not registered as a legal entity anywhere in the world. A lot of US-based private security companies are, which does sound like maybe a little bit of a hair-splitting difference, but there's more to this than just paperwork. Because again, mercenaries are illegal under Russian law, these PMCs, private military contractors or companies. Their shadowy existence gives Russia some pretty important practical and propagandistic capabilities. One, Russia can downplay its battlefield casualties. The death tolls aren't as high if a lot of the people dying were not part of the military, but part of Wagner Group. Secondly, it gives you some distance, and governments love doing this. Okay, again, many governments love doing this. It gives you an ability to say, well, those folks may have done some stuff that is objectionable, but we didn't tell them to. You have to understand, they're just private contractors hired through, a series of Matryoshka doll shell companies. So we are as surprised about these atrocities as you are, and we
Clutches
are
pearls.
Yeah, we're clutching our pearls.
Mm.
We're mad too.
Yeah, it's the old bad apple simplicity that you get there, right? That's not us. Look at those bad apples. We got to rid this conflict of those apples, and then we'll be good.
And it's not like there's we know that these folks are often used to carry out assassinations. And it's not like you're going to leave a paper trail that indicates who you're asking them to target. You could just make the argument that they, did it of their own accord, or they got overzealous or something like that, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
It makes me think of the WikiLeaks videos and atrocities that were exposed by them from Blackwater specifically. Just the same kind of stuff.
Oh, and just a soft note there, in case we don't talk about it in our next strange news segment, Assange is going to be extradited to the United States. The word came through. He is going to be under the prison, just to be clear. And we'll update with that as more comes. So at this point, let's introduce Sorcha McLeod, who is the chair of the United Nations Working Group on the Use of Mercenaries, meaning this person studies all mercenaries for their job. And they've looked at Wagner Group, this UN working organization. They've looked at this group in depth for some time. And McLeod sums up the advantages of having a personal army, one that is bound to a single powerful individual rather than being bound to any sort of constitution or checks and balances, which militaries in theory always are. But let's roll out this quotation. I think it sums it up explicitly and concisely.
Oh man, it sure does. So a lot of what we've already been saying, but according to McLeod, again, an expert on the subject, she believes that the Wagner Group operates in a situation, quote, situation of opacity, that there's a real lack of transparency. And that's the whole point, to create distance between the Russian state and the group, to create this plausible deniability, right? Basically, it's sort of like having a black ops, right? Like a black ops is almost like a version of this that is technically, legitimately exists within the United States military, but you usually send them on some sort of insane suicide mission or something that would be outside of the, legal structure of military operations, and then you're able to disavow them when things go south or they get caught.
Yeah.
Wagner?
Again.
Never heard of him. You talking about the composer?
I do love the Ride of the Valkyries, though. Yeah, I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Yeah, keep your Spotify to yourself. People are dying,
Dear. Oh, dear. Yeah, I mean, this is the last time I'm going to say it, but it really does ring. It sounds a lot like Mr. Prince of the Eric variety. And his just... his ever-evolving group of non-mercenary private army individuals.
Oh, you mean Blackwater? Wait. You mean Academi? Wait. You mean XE? Wait. You mean Constellus? Wait.
I think
What's next? Yeah. It just goes and goes. I mean, the advantages of this arrangement, now that we know this, they're clear. They're clear and they're concrete. But it does seem like a contradictory thing for Russian law, a strange loophole. One might even say a conspiracy, because, again, they consider mercenary work illegal on paper. But by every indication you can find, Russia has been using this group and others like it, those two predecessors we named, in close cooperation with the official military, very much in the ways pioneered just a few years earlier by Uncle Sam in the early 2000s in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And some observers believe the organization itself is totally, like, they say, yes, it exists. There's a reason it doesn't officially exist. And no, they're not mercenaries. No, they're not a PMC. They're just a disguised branch of the Ministry of Defense. And ultimately, the difference is they don't report to the Russian government overall, right? They report to one guy, Big Daddy P. He tells them where to go, and boom, they're Putin on the Ritz. Keep it.
Oh,
Keep it. Not
love
worth it. Not worth it, but keep
Love
it.
it. Ben, no, I don't know if you saw this, but there is a map that shows at least one of the Wagner bases, and how there's a tiny little road connecting it to a Russian military installation that is quite large, just up the road a piece.
Oh, yeah. And that helps us understand why people have these suspicions, why they think there's a con job going on, because Wagner shares bases with the Russian military. If they're flying out somewhere, like odds are they're riding on Russian military aircraft. They use the country's military healthcare. They get passports, right? And they get dodgy passports too, if you need to put some scoot into your operation. Let's maybe talk a little bit about war crimes. So Wagner gets accused of a lot of war crimes, and honestly, tragically, there's a lot of evidence to support a wide range of these accusations. If we go to Declan Walsh, a journalist who was writing for the New York Times back in 2021, just last year, he says that the UN found Wagner, quote, killed civilians, looted homes, and shot dead worshippers at a mosque during a major military operation in the Central African Republic, commonly called CAR. Yeah, this is not counting also the many allegations of sexual assault and torture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, weaponized sexual assault, which is something we've seen reports of as a Russian tactic as well of war, which is absolutely a war crime. No question about it.
And Declan Walsh goes on to describe other things that have occurred, at least by Russian troops and allied government troops. I'm just going to read it. They include, quote, cases of excessive force, indiscriminate killings, occupation of schools, looting on a large scale, including humanitarian organizations that were looted. And particularly, as I mentioned before, the mining centers, these guys have been seen looting around major mining centers, especially in diamond-rich areas of, again, that same place, Central African Republic.
So, in war, you're part of a military force. There are certain rules of engagement, etc. People die in war. It's not considered murder, But how is this not just outright murder?
Yeah. Well, if they are mercenaries, it is. If they are proxies, you can make that case, right? But if they are actual members of the military, then they are supposed to be functioning under the constraints of a military code of conduct, right? In peace or wartime. And it appears that they are not. It's strange because, originally in this story, Walsh recounts how the Kremlin did something that the USSR and Russia now and the United States have been doing all the time. Whenever they want to express hegemonic influence, they say, we won't send you weapons officially. And they're like, they have a finger to their nose, like, no, we won't send you weapons, but we'll send you some trainers to help you figure out some stuff that we've learned, give you some of our expertise in the fight for the greater good. And what turned out happened is that the United Nations co-signed this. They said, okay, send those military trainers to help train this army in CAR. And it quickly became clear that those Russian trainers weren't just training folks. They were armed mercenaries, and they were there to strike pro-Kremlin business deals in the country and on the continent of Africa, because diamonds are a merc's best friend. So they wanted to give clear financial advantages and benefits and boons to Russian business interests, including some of the homeboys of Vladimir Putin. That's just true. That's pretty much true. Yep. But wait, as they say, as Billy Mays used to say, there's more. Don't worry. They're also killing journalists. What are we talking about? We'll tell you after a word from our sponsor.
We're back. if you don't mind, guys, I'd just like to give a quick shout out to Far Cry 2. Very old game at this point. It was, the storyline is very, very similar to what we're describing today. And you get to play as a mercenary. Kind of, sort of, maybe fighting against mercenaries, I guess. But it's pretty much the same idea. And it illustrates in a video game everything we're talking about today. And it's disgusting, but a great game.
Yeah. Yeah. Shout out to Far Cry.
I've always wanted to get into that series. I need to give it a shot.
Yeah. Yeah. It holds up. I enjoyed it. Unfortunately, it is inspired often by somewhat true events. In the case of Wagner Group, they've been implicated in the deaths of journalists like Maxim Borodin, who was a Russian journalist who wanted to learn more about the group. And being a journalist, as you understand, is quite a difficult job, and it can be a physically dangerous job, especially in countries like Russia, unless you are an active asset of the current regime. Problem with being a doctor or a dissident politician or a journalist in Russia is that there are a lot of tall buildings. There are a lot of windows. And so on April the 12th, 2018, this journalist, Maxim, was found heavily injured after he fell from his 5th-story balcony. Sound familiar? Accidents happen, right? Accidents happen. Yet. So he goes into a coma as a result of this and dies 3 days later. Police are investigating this death, but they say, we can just tell you from the jump, this isn't suspicious. And then someone's like, jump, poor choice of words. And the guy's like, I know, I just got to work on the material whenever I can. But this person did die, and they did die in a circumstance that, for the more conspiratorially minded, does indeed look suspicious, especially when we consider that other colleagues of this guy, particularly the chief editor of Novy Den, Polina Romyatseva, said that before Borodin died, she could not rule out a crime. And she said, I can confirm there was no reason for him to commit suicide. And she wasn't the only one saying this was super sketchy.
So Harlem Desir of the OSCE said the death was of serious concern and called for a thorough investigation. Borodin's friend then stated that one day before his fall, Borodin had contacted him at 5 o'clock in the morning saying that there was, quote, once again, someone with a weapon on his balcony and people in camouflage and masks on the staircase landing. That's not scary at all.
Sounds like a suicide to me.
Yeah, right. Yeah, assisted suicide, aka a murder. So why is, back to what McLeod said, the UN expert on mercenaries and their designation, why are they so opaque? Why do we not know more about them? Well, despite, as we've been through, not officially being part of the Russian military, they're essentially held to the same kinds of standards and constraints that actual rank and file soldiers are. And that's just in theory, but not necessarily in practice. So, the public line is no, they're operating within the same conditions that would be, held to a soldier of the Russian military. But in reality, and this is from Yeni Safek, which is a Turkish news site, quote, there is no exact information on how Wagner is financed. Not to mention, where the money comes from. This is a heavily armed group, staffed by people with intense military training and skills. So Yeni Safek, a Turkish news site, questions this. They say there is no exact information on how Wagner is financed. However, considering the fact that training on driving armored vehicles are conducted daily using tens of Cornet missiles, it's clear that great financial support is essential. The Wagner-affiliated military men are paid $1,100 monthly during their training. They need to pass these trainings to be able to be sent to war. Moscow strictly prohibits soldiers from using social media and speaking of the operation for at least 10 years. And Ben, I don't know if you saw this. I think there are some videos of some of these trainings online that have like leaked out.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. There are also a couple of ex-Wagner members who have come forward to talk a little bit more about the relationship. But what seems to be happening here, if you follow the money, is that so this group either doesn't exist or it's a private security company, just like Blackwater or whatever the name they're going by. And the idea then is that someone has to be paying them. But if you unpeel the proxies and the layers of the onion here, then it seems very much that the Russian government is paying them, just in a way that allows them that plausible deniability, that distance, and also allows them to more directly follow the whims of the ruling inner circle. The idea of not being able to speak of an operation for at least 10 years is also a big part of why so much of this is murky, why it's been called a shadow army. Okay, and let's talk about this. So we have a future episode coming up on pro-Nazi forces that were active in Ukraine, right? And this was one of the primary public justifications from the Putin-run government of Russia for the invasion and the ongoing war. They wanted to denazify Ukraine. That's what they said, right? And the weird thing about this denazification is that Wagner is active in Ukraine as we record, and Utkin was given the call sign Wagner because of his affection for the, quote, attributes and ideology of Adolf Hitler. Yes, that Adolf Hitler. If there's a different Adolf Hitler, apologies to you, man. Life's got to be tough with that name. But this is like the World War II Nazi leader, genocidal maniac, Adolf Hitler. And we pulled some of this from militaryarms.ru, which is where you can also see reports about Utkin in The Economist, in a couple of other Western outlets, where they talk about him having multiple neo-Nazi tattoos. Also, I don't think this is reading tea leaves too much. Tell me if I'm wrong, you guys, but Wagner was Hitler's favorite composer. So it does seem like a shout out on multiple levels.
No, I mean, that's, Wagner is a very important composer in the history of like modern music, but is widely acknowledged as being a virulent anti-Semite. And, Wagner's music was often heard playing through loudspeakers at the death camps as Jewish families were marched to the gas chambers or other horrific forms of, mass execution. It's honestly his reputation is so Wagner's is so controversial, and yet his music is so important. I actually went to the Jewish Museum in Berlin, and there was a really fascinating exhibit where some Jewish composers and performers were talking about how they're able to justify playing Wagner's music. And one of the most interesting justifications was, the man would probably be rolling over at his grave if he knew that a Jewish principal violinist and conductor were, at the helm of his music.
Yeah, those Nazis are real jerks. Wow. But Utkin maybe doesn't believe in that particular vile ideology. Maybe he's got another thing up his sleeve. Or on his sleeve? Is that how it would work?
Yeah, he's got the tats, though. That's not a decision people make lightly. Former members of Wagner say that Utkin is actually something called a rodnover, which is a practitioner of a native Slavic belief system. Rodnovery is sometimes called neo-paganism, or considered a modern pagan religion. But setting aside the whatever personal religious beliefs, this guy, Utkin, who has been the face of this for a while, setting aside whatever beliefs that person may have, various parts of Wagner have been clearly linked to far-right neo-Nazi beliefs and white supremacy. And, we've seen this in U.S. law enforcement as well. We've seen it in factions of the military as well. We've had people in law enforcement and in the U.S. military write to us and say, yeah, these cliques are rolling and people know about them. But Utkin, when you think of the plausible deniability aspect, it's interesting that Utkin has been in photo ops with Vladimir Putin. It makes it increasingly hard and somewhat cartoonish to deny that top Russian leadership is somehow not involved. Oh, we just hobnob together. Oh, my chef gives him money. I don't know what they're up to. I thought he, was delivering oranges or something in Syria, whatever. Like it's almost offensive to try to maintain that sort of deception. For what? For like a legal precedent? I'm so interested in this group, and I know that there may be fellow conspiracy realists in the audience who have interacted with Wagner in some way, depending on where you were deployed. So, how has the world responded? With sanctions. Ooh, do check out our episode on sanctions. Do they work? Are they moral? Well, not too many people were worried about that when it came to Wagner. The U.S. Treasury Department sanctioned Russia and sanctioned that the so-called chef Prigozhin directly, like as an individual. That's like a dubious, infamous distinction. You're pretty big time.
Yeah.
In a bad way, if a country is like, we're going to sanction some groups and also this dude. That's
well,
like,
it's a bad time for oligarchs, right?
Now. That's like, imagine what does that do for your self-esteem when an entire country or region like the EU gets together, and countries and these organizations, they have a hard time agreeing. They all got together and they said, who sucks? This guy. Like, how do you, maybe I'm exercising too much empathy. I don't think that guy really cares. And we haven't met him. But the EU and the UK joined in. They also imposed sanctions, again, on this guy specifically. Entire countries are like, this guy is for the birds. He's the worst. And they were related to his financing, as they see it, of Wagner in October of 2020. That's when the EU and the UK did it. It was specifically for activities in Libya. U.S. Department of Treasury also in 2017 sanctioned Wagner Group and then sanctioned Utkin, the guy we were talking about earlier, again, specifically. I don't know. I don't know if that's on the bucket list of infamy. Like, does anybody, would you brag about that? Would you be like, hey, this whole country thinks I blow?
I would just be freaking out because somebody's freezing all the assets that I've been gathering with my oligarch status. I mean, that would be upsetting. I've got just all this cash and yachts and businesses, and now they're saying I can't play with my toys. I'm upset.
Where am I going to land my yacht? We've all been there.
You just got like helicopters that carry the yacht around and they land at places.
Yeah. Join conspiracy stuff shows Yachtlanders. We're the number one yacht transporter. We got 100% don't ask, don't tell sanctions policy.
Oh boy, we got 42 giant helicopters. They'll pick up your yacht wherever it needs to be. It'll just be dropped off. You're going to love it.
Call now. Oh man, we should have. That sounds like a Illumination Global Unlimited commercial, but I think they got smacked by sanctions for the yacht scam.
We call it yacht sprees, and they're just Ospreys. Wait, is that the right one? Is that the big helicopter? What's the huge helicopter? Oh yeah, it is Ospreys. It's a Boeing V-22 Osprey. That's the one I'm thinking about.
Oh, the VTOL, right? Vertical takeoff landing. Yeah, that's how you move the yacht. Side note, there have been allegations, unconfirmed, that Internet Illumination Global Unlimited is just taking the yachts. But we can't confirm that.
Just parking them somewhere on the Georgia coast.
What yacht? What are you going to do about it? Anyhow, we're making light of some of this, but it is really important to note that these sanctions aren't just political theater, at least in the stated opinions of those imposing them. Instead, they say that Well, let's take a line from what the EU said in December of last year when they put further sanctions against the Wagner Group, as well as 8 individuals and 3 other entities connected to it. They said everyone involved was sanctioned because of serious human rights abuses, including torture, extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary executions and killings, or in destabilizing activities in countries they operate in, including Libya, Syria, Ukraine, Donbass region specifically, and Central African Republic. So what they're saying is these folks are going in and they're doing wet work and they're trying to design coups. This is not something nations like to officially smile upon, but it's a true story. And that's when we have to ask, what happens next? Wagner is still active. They haven't stopped. But then so are, the parent companies of places like the former operator Blackwater. So we have to ask, is the U.S. in a hypocritical position here? And what does it mean for the world if this trend of private operators in practice not subject to the same regulations as an actual military, what if this trend continues? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it inevitable? We want to hear from you. Let us know what you think. We can't wait for your thoughts and experience. We try to be easy to find online.
Boy, do we ever. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube, and you can find us on Twitter at the handle Conspiracy Stuff. On Instagram, we are Conspiracy Stuff Show.
Yes, tell us about how the private armies will one day be robo-armies, and maybe they'll just all be artificially intelligent and fight everyone. And it'll be fun times for all. Call 1-833-STDWYTK. It's a voicemail system. You get 3 minutes, say whatever you'd like. Please include your nickname, whatever you want that to be, and let us know whether we can use your name and voice on the air. Do appreciate that. We can't wait to hear from you. If you want to instead contact us the old-fashioned way, we've got a pipeline for you. It's ready. All you got to do is send an email to
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.